Oh, hi there. I wanted to talk about the NHL and their tentative agreement with the NHL players, the retired ones, that had a court case about concussions. There are many aspects to consider. I mean, the plain as day obvious one is that the NHL, specifically Gary Bettman, chiseled them. He chiseled the players, and he's offering them a pittance. And to be honest, I would rather see that most players say "fuck you" to this deal, and you know, take it back to court and see what happens. I don't know if that is the way it's going to be, but that's definitely what I would do in that situation. If long-term health problems associated with workplace injury where proper information was not conveyed upon the players and the National Hockey League, I would not be satisfied with $22,000. That would not be good enough for me. In saying that, most of the NHL players, because there's not an exact list of who's on the players that are going for money because of concussion problems. There's not an exact list. There are a few notable players. One of the most vocal, because he'd done a few tweets, was Dan Carcillo. And he played for a bunch of teams. I think he last played with Chicago. And he was around the league not too long ago. He only retired, I think it was like a year or two ago, maybe a little bit longer. But he hasn't been out of the NHL that long. It could have been a little bit longer than that, but not that much longer. He was around when concussions were starting to become more and more of a topic in the NHL, because for the longest time they were just ignored. And it would not surprise me in the least if organizations, not just the NHL, but obviously the NFL and every other sports organization, suppressed the release of information regarding concussions for as long a period as they could. I mean, the medical profession is filled with incompetent, corrupt cunts, but that was something that, would have been plain as day obvious to anybody, and if it wasn't, the humanity. Mankind is in a lot of trouble if they didn't figure that one out until recently. But there are things to consider. I mean, NHL players, they sign contracts to enter the NHL. And a lot of it will be kind of things in the agreement saying, look, if you get injured, you're taking that chance playing this game. The thing that is concerning about it is, even up until the early 2000s, a lot of NHL players were not actually paid very much money. Most not big name stars or hockey players were not paid anything. As far as you got your big names, and they made a lot of money, even in the 90s and lesser extent the 80s and such. And you get the Sidney Crosby types now, the Alexander Ovechkins that are worth so much money. But a lot of players didn't get paid that much. And even bottom line, fourth line players, they're worth $500,000 a year. And, they didn't get that kind of money back in the day. And, the problem is a lot of the plaintiffs are actually going to be, not financially well off anyway. At this point, because, their careers would have ended years ago. And now that they're bickering with the NHL over concussion issues, any hopes of them ever getting a gig in the NHL or having any of their descendants make it to the NHL will become that much smaller. Because the NHL remembers and the NHL punishes. They don't have to hire people for jobs if they don't want to. And, it would be a lame claim to fame for most of those hockey players, knowing that they can never get a job back in the NHL, not as a player, but as anything. And nobody related to them or anything. They have no connections back into the NHL. They didn't make enough money when they were there because, I don't know, money was worth more back in the 90s, but it, depending on who they were as a person, did they invest in the right places or whatever, they may not have the money to actively pursue going after the NHL again, and I think that is what they are going for. The NHL is hoping that the players just can't muster up the kind of money that they would need to combat the NHL properly. And I mean, you get guys like Sidney Crosby, who has concussion type problems of his own, worth tons of money. He's not going to say very much. Maybe he did to the NHL in private, we don't know. But as far as him saying things publicly, it was very, it was good that he made a point of saying something. But that was about it. It was plain Jane what he had to say. It was like, oh, he hopes that they can, mutually come to an agreement, and essentially it's part of the game and all that sort of stuff. Maybe he doesn't have a choice. Maybe there are NHL, girlfriend lackeys that, start pummeling his balls like Mads Mikkelsen did in Casino Royale against James Bond. Maybe Sidney Crosby, he physically cannot do it. He cannot criticize the NHL, not even simply, indirectly or anything like that. Maybe he's contractually obligated to do that. I mean, he's a superstar with 3 Stanley Cups and all that kind of stuff, but, their power is quite limited and constricted. And, to me, that was actually a good thing that Sidney Crosby had something to say, but, he had to, tread carefully because, he could, be in a spot of bother otherwise. Oh, that's not funny. Well, the thing is, the big argument is that NFL players are going to receive more money, hypothetically, if, it actually goes through and all. It's supposed to be over $1 billion or something like that. It all sounds razzle-dazzle to me, but, if they have players actually get it, I don't know, that's another question altogether. And not only that, if they're getting more money for medical treatment, that actually usually simply means more medical experimentation. That doesn't mean anything. Any wise hockey player or NFL player, for that matter, if they received money to go get medical treatment, they would be better off saying, look, I'll just take the money and do what I want with it. Especially NHL players. I mean, $75,000 to have medical expenses covered. Unless, you're in bad trouble, it's not worth it. Some of them probably are, though, unfortunately. But the difference between the NHL and the NFL is there's actually a whole lot less concussions in the NHL. And I know I gave kind of the cold shoulder to Elias Pettersson when he got hit by Matheson and essentially chokeslam, a very good theatrical performance. I was kind of cold about that. But as I said, he was wearing, state-of-the-art equipment. He landed on his shoulder first. You can walk off things like that. And it's not simply every time you've been hit in the NHL, and NHL players' careers quite often span for 10-15 years at least. But it's also what you had to do to get into the NHL, because back in the 90s and even early 2000s and before that, it was a physical game to get into the NHL, as far as being in the minor leagues and everything that has to do with that. And once they reach the NHL, it really becomes more of a show. Every time they are hit, it's for theatrics. I mean, the hits are real. They do shake you about. You get bruised. Brains rattle. But most serious injuries are accidental. no player goes out there to seriously harm a player. I mean, the hockey guy had made reference to Todd Bertuzzi and Steve Moore really quick in a video, in his video, basically saying how much money Steve Moore was going after him. Todd Bertuzzi had no intention of hurting him that bad. It was theatrics and, you know, him having to defend his captain kind of thing. And it got a little out of hand. That's all that happened. And that's what happens a lot of the times when players get serious injuries at the fault of another player. I mean, obviously, you know, accidents happen, like, what was that Buffalo Sabres goalie? Anyway, he got nicked on the throat. It was kind of gruesome. That was an accident. Anyway, we're not talking about those kind of injuries. We're talking about concussions. They do know a lot more about concussions, and players still enter the league and still get concussions. And, you know, that it can be limited. It's impossible to remove that entirely from the game, and it's important that players understand that as they're signing contracts. They may not understand that when they're 19 years old and they're signing a big contract worth a lot of money, and they got a sycophants around them telling them, yes, do it, do it, do it, do it. At 19 years of age, there's hardly anybody who has a brain in their head to start with, let alone, you know, comprehending all the things that could possibly go wrong. And yeah, the NHL simply being cold and, you know, paying as little as possible. Like, I know this has got to have been a long, drawn out, bitter court case, and both sides hate each other's guts probably, even though they're, you know, polite businessmen and they would never say that in public. But, you know, the fact of the matter is they probably hate each other. I would presume, like, I hardly even know what the symptoms of a concussion are. I've never had one before. But headaches are often associated with them, and maybe they get bad headaches every single day, and it's like, I don't know, that, you know, can get irritating after a while, I suppose, and, you know, it can cause anger management issues, and then you have to worry about, well, when you get older, are you going to get any other neurological problems because of those concussions? I'm not sure if any of those are related to them, like Parkinson's or anything like that, Alzheimer's. I'm not sure if they if they do have anything to do with them, but you know, you don't want to think about that, especially if, you know, you're in your 40s or something like that, and you're starting to think, well, what's the long-term effects of this kind of physical play going to have on my body in the long term? Are things just going to get worse, or are they going to mellow out, or what's going to happen? And you don't really know. Yeah, so in total it's about $22 million that the NHL is forking over, and they may not do it if not enough of the players agree to it. You know, that's for all the players. That's, you know, it is a pittance. But those NFL players, I mean, a whole lot less people are going to remember them. I mean, like most of the NHL players, I'm sure I wouldn't remember if I saw the list. I actually Google searched the list and didn't see any of them. But yeah, you do have to tread lightly on things like this because, you know, sometimes evil corporate industries, they don't give a damn if you are right. And, you know, you do deserve proper compensation. Sometimes they're simply assholes who won't pay you because they don't want to. They don't want to hurt their bottom line. And $22 million out of the NHL pocket, that's not hurting their bottom line in the least. If they can ditch all of the players from before 2000 that have concussion-type symptoms, then they're in the good. Because now new rules and regulations are in place for the NHL, and less players are going to have those kind of head injuries. As I've said it before, you know, the physicality of the game, fighting even, those are important aspects, but, you know, in protecting players, then that means they're going to have to take away some of their freedoms and things like that, as far as when they go to sign contracts and things like that, simply to protect them. I mean, you know, some might remember when Marty McSorley hit Donald Brashear with a stick on the back of the head. no amount of training or education about concussions is going to protect you when your back is turned and somebody cracks a hockey stick on the back of your head. I forget the context of exactly why McSorley did that, other than he was probably an asshole. Maybe he had reasons, not good reasons, but I'm just saying. Because I was a little bit younger back then, so I don't quite get the context of that. But yeah, that was a ruthless thing for him to do, and that is going to cause concussion problems, no doubt about. Dangerous play, very dangerous play. So yeah, I'm hoping the NHL players stick it out and really, get the money that they deserve. And if they're getting, 75 grand for medical treatment and things like that, they've either got to be in real big trouble or, physically, or it ain't worth it, because those doctors, scientists and things like that tinkering around with your brain, you don't want that. That's bad news all around. Because they won't have your best intentions in mind. Like, these are the kind of people that poison lab mice for a living. They're not to be trusted. With anything. You couldn't even trust them with a model car collection, let alone a hockey player's brain. They like to think they're all high and mighty, but they're not. And as I said earlier, I really hope they weren't that stupid where it's like it only simply, in the dawn of the century, dawned on them that, head injuries can cause long-term problems. Because then they're kind of on the scale of retarded themselves. I mean, it's more plausible, like I said, that the NHL and other sports organizations simply suppressed this information so that they could continue signing up players to the NHL without warning them of the risk, and in such a way where they're not legally obligated. And that's probably where the NHL was more intelligent, not more kind, but more intelligent than the NFL. The wording in the contracts was probably better. They had probably better lawyers. And there is a whole lot head contact in the game. As a matter of fact, you can be an NHL player, and depending on your style of play, you may never actually get hit significantly ever in your entire NHL career. Whereas a football player, it's unavoidable. You can't get away from it. And when they hit each other, 260, 300-pound geezer smacks you with a bone-crushing hit, yeah, that's going to do some damage. Not that, a 200-pound guy hitting you wouldn't do damage, but it's a different type of thing. It's not the same thing. Yeah, so that was the bottom line. I felt that NHL players should get paid more than what they're getting paid, but I guess if they don't have the money to go to court, then they don't have it. And of course, there are other sports organizations where it's like, ooh, this is really bad. Like, it's not just, football. There's also obviously wrestling. Wrestling's a big one where people have got concussion problems. Caused a few deaths, as a matter of fact. Probably the same in the NFL too, actually. I can't think of any offhand. And the most notable hockey players to not die of natural causes weren't that recent. I mean, Derek Bogard, he had concussion-type problems, chronic pain, he overdosed. There's Wade Belak, he probably had concussion problems too, because he was a fighter. But yeah, in the last 20 or so years, there hasn't been that many hockey players that have, died because of brain injury. Whether it's because, I don't know, like they had a back concussion or something like that, and it led to disrupted thought, and they put themselves in harm's way, and then that's how they died. I don't know, but as far as that being the direct cause, it's not really noted upon. I think Bob Probert, he also had a lot of concussion problems. I'm not sure if that had anything to do with his death. It probably did, actually. But I don't know. I should have looked that up before I made this video. Anyway, concussions are a serious problem, but as I said before in other videos, hitting and fighting in the game should not be removed, but it should be better calculated so the risk is minimized for long-term injuries for hockey players. And the hockey players that were in this lawsuit and are getting underpaid because of it, because of the contracts they sign, legal obligations and all that sort of stuff, that, you know, it's a shame. It's a shame on hockey, but that's how the business world works. It's, you know, eat or be eaten. And, you know, I hope they, you know, continue the good fight and, you know, things work out for them. Anyway, I will talk to you people later. Have a good one.